Alright, in this video we are going to talk about inverse functions. We're going to talk about what are the inverse functions, and then we're going to look at how to find an inverse function given a table. Alright, so inverses. The English definition says it's opposite or contrary in position, direction, or order, so that it's opposite or reverse of something else. And I just wanted to show you the comparison between the English definition and the mathematical definition. Inverse operations are opposite operations. So everything's opposite with the inverse. You have addition is opposite of subtraction, division is opposite of multiplication. Right? And you've been using inverses since you learned how to solve for x. Important things to know about inverse function. If the original function passes the horizontal line test, then the inverse will be a function too. So to prove a graph is a function, you learned that it has to pass the vertical line test. If it passes the vertical line test, it is a function. So if you think about it, inverses are opposite. So for the inverse to be a function, it has to pass the horizontal line test. Inverse functions are undoing the original function. So the inverse of x plus 2, you want to undo the plus, would be minus. So the inverse of x plus 2 is x minus 2. Anytime you are working backwards, you are applying the inverse. So for example, you've been applying inverse operations since you learned how to solve for equations. Let's talk more about the horizontal line test. The horizontal line test is used to determine whether a function's inverse will be a function by seeing if the original function passed the horizontal line test. So you don't even have to graph the inverse function to know if it's going to be a function or not. If the original function passes the horizontal line test, then the inverse is a function. If the original function does not pass the horizontal line test, then its inverse is not a function. So the original function can be a function and the inverse is not a function, okay? So, example, the quadratic. So we graph the function y equals x squared, and I want to determine whether its inverse is a function. So we do the horizontal line test. So remember, it can only touch it once. Well, the graph does not pass the horizontal line test because the horizontal line touches the graph at 1, 2 spots. So therefore, the inverse of the quadratic is not a function. Okay? So a relation is a mapping of input values, x values, onto values, y values. So here are 3 ways to show the same relation. So a relation is just a mapping of input values and output values, and there are 3 ways to represent that. And those are the 3 ways we're going to learn how to find the inverse of. The first way is the equation, the second way is a table, and the third way is a graph. So we are going to learn those 3 ways of how to find an inverse. Okay, an equation, table of value, and graph, and not in that order. So inverse relation, just think. You switch x and y values. So if you ever get like stumped, if you just remember that the inverse means to switch x and y, you'll be fine because that's the first step in all of these problems. So to find the inverse of an equation, and we're going to go over more of this in another video, but to find the inverse of an equation, you switch the x and y and then solve for y. To find the inverse of a table, you switch your x and y's. To find the inverse of a graph, you collect your points, then switch x and y, and then plot new points. And if you notice that in each one of these, one step is switch x and y. Okay, so that's why I wanted to say, if you just remember, the inverse correlates to switching x and y values. That's going to help you remember how to solve most of these problems, okay? All right. So now let's start doing some problems, okay? So in this video, we are going to learn how to find the inverse given tables, and then we're going to ask you certain questions about those tables, okay? So here's an example. To find the inverse of a given table, you switch your x and y points and make an f of inverse table. So I want to talk about this notation. That is inverse notation. Okay, so your original function is your f of x function. Your inverse is written like this. That negative 1 as an exponent means an inverse. So this is saying that this is the inverse of f of x. Okay? So if you look, all we did was take our x column and we put it in the y column. And then we took our y column and we moved it to our x column. We switched our x and y points, and that's all you got to do. So for number 1, the question says find the inverse of the given table. So I'm given this table. Step 1, we need to make a new table, and we're going to label this f of inverse x. We're going to take these x values, okay, and we're going to put them in the y column. -2, -1, 1, 3, 5, and 6. Then we're going to take the y column and we're going to make it our x column. And that is all the question is asking for. And that is your answer. Okay? That's all you have to do is switch your x and y's. That is it. Alright. Next one. The next one's actually going to ask a specific question. It says the table of values represents all points in the function g of x. So this is the original function. Okay? And I want to know what is the value of g of inverse of 3. So let's talk about function notation. Remember, what's in parentheses, that is your x value. Okay, so this is saying that I want to know, so g of x, that represents the y value. Okay, so it's saying when x is 3, what is y, but on the inverse graph. So first, we have to make the inverse table. So that's like what we just did in example 1. You're going to switch your x and y's. So my y's become my x's, and my x's become my y's. After you do that, then you can answer the question. Okay, so first make the inverse table. And it's saying on the inverse table, when x is 3, what is y? Well, when x is 3 right here, y is -6. So my answer would be -6. Okay? All right, let's do another one. It says the table of values represents all points on the function g of x. So this is my original. And it says on the inverse graph, when x is 2, what is y? So before we can answer this question, we have to make the inverse table. So we come over here, and to make the inverse table, we are simply just going to switch our x and y's. So all the y's come over here. Okay, and then all our x's go on the y column. Okay. Now we can answer the question, and the question's asking when x is -2, when x is -2, what is y? -1. And that's your answer. Okay. A lot of people like to skip this step right here of making the table, but it makes it so much easier. And it calls for less errors if you just go ahead and take that 2 seconds and make that inverse table, and then it's like boom, there's the answer. Okay. All right, next one says, so this one is a little bit different. It says the table of values represent all the points on the function g of x. So this is my original graph. Okay, and it's g of x. What is the value of x given g of inverse x equals -3? So this is different. Remember I told you g of x is your y value? So this is saying that when -3 is my y value, I actually want to know what my x value is, but on the inverse graph. So we've got to make the inverse table. Switch all your points. So this is saying when my y value is -3, when my y value is -3, what's the x value? -1. And that's your answer. Okay, let's keep going. So this one says that the table of values represent all the points in the function g of x. So this is g of x again. And it says, what is the value of x? So again, this is saying when the y value is 10, what is the x value on the inverse graph? So let's make the inverse graph. So we're going to switch our points. See, they don't take long. Don't take long at all. So when the y value is 10, what's the x value? 15. And that's your answer. Okay? Alright, so pause this video and I want you to try this one on your own, okay? So take the time to make the table, alright? So pause it right now and give it a shot. Alright, so I hope you paused the video and I hope you took the time to try this problem out, and now let's see if you got it right. So it says, what is the value of g of -2? So this is back to the beginning, and I'm asking, this is the x value, and I want to know what y is on the inverse graph. So first we have to make the inverse table, and I hope you did. Switch your points. Okay, and this is saying when the x value is 2, what is y? 0. And that's your answer. I hope you got it right. Alright, and so that is it for inverses with table of values. The next video is going to show you inverses with graphs. Okay?